Hey everyone, it's Jack from Cultaholic.com, and you know what time of the week it is. It's Friday. Gotta get down on Friday, and that's because it's my favourite time of the week, because it's time to look at every single one of my wrestlers of the week. Now, there's been quite a lot of good wrestling this week, to be honest, on the old match quality Rooney meter. Despite the lack of wrestling on a global scale, what we've seen on TV has been of quite a generally high standard across the board. So there's quite a few choices to make on wrestlers of the week, which means there's been a few who've narrowly missed out. So without any further ado, let's take a look at the old honourable mentions. We've got Daniel Bryan and Cesaro, who had a good match on SmackDown, but again, Bryan beat Cesaro, which he seems to be doing for fun in the past few weeks. Aleister Black and Austin Theory likewise had a good match on Raw. Tony Nese lost his match in the Interim Cruiserweight Championship tournament, but it was a good match. And El Hijo del Fantasma made his NXT debut and won his tournament match. And normally he would have got on the top 10, but unfortunately there were just that many more better matches this week across the board. And also one final honourable mention to Dustin Rhodes, who put his career on the line to beat Kip Sabian in a quarter-final match of a tournament. But he did it, he won, so he's still with us, yeah. Now onto my number 10, picking up 1 point this week and his first appearance of 2020. It's recent WWE signee, Jake Atlas, from out old West Side, California way. Yeah, that's what the cool kids do. Atlas had a good match against Drake Maverick, who's been hitting all of the headlines recently for his release video, the one that he put out on social media, but it was Jake Atlas who picked up the win in this first tournament match. That doesn't mean he's through to the next round, of course. This is a round-robin tournament with kind of like a mini G1 climax sort of thing, which will lead to a final, and then the winner of that, I assume, goes on to face Jordan Devlin. But it was a good performance from Jake Atlas, and we can see glimpses of why he was such a beloved figure out on the West Coast scene, especially for promotions like PWG, because he's really, really good. I mean, he's wowed us before in the Battle of LA tournaments, for example, and you could see little glimpses of that here. It wasn't like an amazing, fully drawn out match, but it was certainly a good one. The most captivating thing about Jake Atlas for me was his finisher, that lovely cartwheel on the top rope into a DDT. It looks awesome. It might require a bit of a contrived setup, but some finishers do, and I think that despite that, it's really good and looks like a very effective move. So all in all, a good week for Jake Atlas, number 10 on this list as well, and picking up 1 point. Now, let's move on to number 9. We're sticking with the Interim Cruiserweight Championship tournament for just a second, and we're going to talk about somebody who really has been disappointing for a little while. Not in terms of his own actual performances, but in terms of the way he's being utilized. I'm talking about former New Japan great, the ace of their junior heavyweight division, Kishida. Kishida beat Tony Nese in what was a really nice, hard-fought, pretty even match, and it showcased all of the things that make Kishida such an excellent all-rounder. You know, he's got high flying, he's got submissions, he's got strikes, but once again, in this format, we're not really seeing the very best of Kishida. He's not having like 15-20-minute matches where he can really show us what he could do. But I do have high hopes for Kishida in this tournament, despite his kind of fall from grace since signing with WWE. That's because I've seen firsthand how good Kishida can be in a tournament setup. That's right, if you remember back in 2017, Kishida won the WCPW Pro Wrestling World Cup, defeating Will Ospreay in the final. And that was really cool, you know. I remember at one point he'd had like a really good like semi-final match or something, or like one of his qualifying matches before the final, and I was behind the curtain and he came through and I went, "Good match, Kishida," and he went, "Thank you." We didn't really talk much. I just went, "Oh, great match, mate," and he was like, "Cheers." And then Adam Pacitti laughed at me. He laughed at me once Kishida had gone away. He laughed at me because he went Jack the Jobber telling Kishida good match. I was just trying to be polite. And because of this anyway, I think that Kishida could win this whole thing and become the interim Cruiserweight champion. I think that he's a really good matchup for Devlin. I think they could have a banger of a match, like a 5-star match if they wanted to, and if they were given the time. And I think that as the tournament goes on, we might see Kishida progress to better and more hard-fought matches. But that's not a knock on this one. It was still a good match with Tony Nese, and Kishida picked up the submission victory. He moves on, not to the next round, but he's leading the group. Congratulations, mate. Number 8, picking up 3 big points. It's a big man, a big meaty man with all that tricep meat. That's right, it's 1/3 of the New Day, and they are, of course, the new SmackDown Tag Team Champions. It's Big E. Right, so at WrestleMania 36, we saw the SmackDown Tag Team titles defended in a 3-way ladder match. Not a 3-team ladder match, like a triple threat ladder match between Kofi Kingston, Jimmy Uso, and John Morrison. This slightly odd setup was because of The Miz reportedly turning up ill to work and not being allowed to work WrestleMania because of the safety of everybody else involved. So it became that really quite impressive triple threat ladder match, which of course Morrison won to keep the titles on himself and The Miz. But we saw on SmackDown last Friday night, that a rematch was booked featuring the other halves of the three respective teams. So The Miz was back, Big E, of course, and Jey Uso. And even though the match wasn't maybe as long or as well planned out as I'd have liked it to have been, it was still a big victory for Big E and an impressive week for him. The main reason that I found it such an impressive week as well was not just because the match was okay, because it was, and there was a big title change involved, but it was a rare chance we get these days to see Big E wrestle in a singles capacity. And Ross was even saying after this match, you know, I would love to see Big E have a bit of a singles run, but he was clear to stress that he doesn't want to see him break away from the New Day. He wants them to stay together forever until they retire. But he did enjoy Big E as a singles competitor once again, showing us all what he can do. And I have to fully agree with him. I thought that this was a nice little chance to see what Big E can do without Woods and Kingston backing him up. And it turns out what he can do is win the SmackDown Tag Team titles. Now, this title change was a little bit of a surprise to me, because I originally predicted that the Usos would win at WrestleMania, and then we'd get that one last like Usos New Day feud. But after Miz and Morrison retained, I thought, oh, they're probably in for quite a long title reign. It turns out that's not the case, because just a couple of weeks later, they have dropped the titles to the New Day. I wonder now whether Miz and Morrison will be moved off to a different feud or another part of the card, and we'll get that Usos New Day feud. I don't really know. I guess it all remains to be seen. But what happened this week was that Big E won the belts for his boys. Number 7, Booyaka Booyaka, 619. Booyaka Booyaka, that's my Puebla. It's Rey Mysterio. Rey took part in probably the best match on WWE TV this week, taking on Buddy Murphy, or just Murphy, in a Money in the Bank qualifier match. Now, the reason that Murphy doesn't get in the top 10, despite the match's quality, is the fact that I really didn't agree with the booking. I think that Murphy should have gone to that Money in the Bank ladder match in a couple of weeks' time, and I think that Rey could have easily taken a loss here and it wouldn't have harmed him at all. I mean, Mysterio's basically made a career of losing and getting battered by people, only to not have it affect his popularity because he's just so lovable. He's small, he's flippy, he wears masks, kids love him. Yeah, give Murphy the win here. But no, that's not what happened. Rey Mysterio picked up the win. But then again, I would have the sourest of grapes if I was complaining about Rey Mysterio being in a Money in the Bank ladder match. You know, that's not really the worst case scenario. And of course, you can't complain when he has matches like this as well, because this match was really, really good. I enjoyed it, apart from the finish, obviously, because Rey won. But once again, I'm just waiting for whenever he's going to hit that cliff and just his quality's going to dip, because it hasn't happened yet. And he's getting on a bit, and he hasn't slowed down one bit. So he really is a marvel. I wonder if he's human. I wonder if he's just a cyborg in a colourful mask. Number 6, right, he's ahead of Rey Mysterio, and he didn't have the best match in WWE this week, but he had the most compelling one, I think, in terms of the storyline, both in kayfabe and in a wider, more real-world sense. Of course, I'm talking about the man of the moment right now, Drake Maverick. Now, if you've missed all of the goings on with Drake Maverick, basically he was included in that batch of releases that WWE announced last week, and pretty quickly uploaded a video to Twitter, a very raw, emotional video where he was talking about how devastated he was, but how he's still got this tournament to compete in, and how basically he has to win the tournament now, otherwise that's the end of his WWE career. That video did gangbusters online. Everyone was sharing it and commenting on it and wishing him all the best of luck and everything. Not so much in the tournament, I think, but more in a wider sense of whatever he does after WWE. Now there's been conflicting sets of speculation. Some people think that Drake is now going to be kept on because of this excellent promo, effectively, or was it even a promo? It seemed really real. And the other set of speculation indicates that no, he's not being kept on. They are going to let him go. Now, on the surface, the fact that he lost to Jake Atlas, a very new star in NXT, seems to indicate that, you know, it is true. He is probably going to be let go. However, the way that it was presented is a little bit murkier and could indicate that he's being kept on. I don't really know. Myself and Adam Pacitti have had a bit of a debate about this. I still think that Maverick's going to be putting people over on his way out. But then Adams made a very valid point and said, well, why would they give him such a compelling storyline and build him up, only to then release him? And Adam's got a point there, but I just have this weird gut feeling. I just feel like the fact that he's lost to Jake Atlas in round 1 might mean that, well, obviously he's got to win his next 2 matches to progress, but he might not do that, especially not in the same group as Kishida, I believe. So, and Kishida's obviously my pick to win the tournament. I'm sticking with my guns, and I think that for whatever reason, this is just a compelling storyline, but he will still be let go. But do let me know which side of the divide you fall on in the comments section down below. Anyway, the match itself was a good one. Even though he lost, Maverick was excellent here, because we're not used to seeing him so serious, especially in ring, because, you know, he's been in the 24/7 division for a while. He had that very unfortunate angle with the Big Show when he was terrified into urinating himself. But when he's serious, it's really different and compelling, because we're not used to seeing it. And I think that's only going to increase. Drake could see some serious points in the next couple of weeks because it's going to get more and more tense, especially if he wins next week and then it's all to play for in the final week of action. I think those matches are going to be must-see wrestling, at least, you know, in terms of NXT, because what else is really going on in the world right now? And it seems weird that the comedy GM of 205 Live and the 24/7 dude and the guy who wears pants, he's now arguably the most compelling person in wrestling right now, and I think that's fantastic. And hopefully, if he does indeed get let go, hopefully this is enough to show so many promotions just exactly what Drake Maverick can do. Now let's go to Impact Wrestling, where there's been a very interesting situation. They had to cancel their Rebellion pay-per-view and instead kind of cut it in half and put it on TV over 2 weeks. We've seen number one, night one this week. We're going to see night two next week. And the big winner of night one, in my opinion, was the new X Division champion defeating Ace Austin for that title. It's Willie Mack. Willie Mack is the dude, man. Like, I just love him. He's been on Lucha Underground. He's been all over the indies and everything. Now he's in Impact. And I just don't understand why he's never talked about more, because he's a great brawler, he can move incredibly well for a big guy, and he's really charismatic and just a great babyface. I remember in Lucha Underground he had a hardcore match and he just got a can of beer from someone in the crowd or two and just did the Steve Austin thing, but it was like, it wasn't a rip-off, it didn't seem, it was more of an homage, and it was really cool, because he's just cool, he's quite effortlessly good at what he does. And I think that Ace Austin was a bit of a breath of fresh air for the X Division, because he was kind of this insanely, horribly cocky heel, like Sammy Guevara on speed, but I think that now was the right time to do that title change so that Ace Austin can move on to a different feud. He doesn't need the belt to have intense and personal feuds, whereas Willie Mack can really remind us all of his stock and his caliber with this X Division title. So I think it's a really excellent booking decision. I also need to point out, for those unfamiliar with Impact or the X Division as a general concept, it doesn't matter what size or weight you are. Samoa Joe was once the X Division champion. Willie Mack is easily allowed to be the X Division champion, especially because sometimes he does wrestle in more of a nimble, athletic style, but then obviously has the power and the size to just destroy someone in the face. Number 4, he's been picking up quite a few points this year, and it's time to talk about him once again this week. It's my boy, the Spanish God, Sammy Guevara. Sammy's really good at losing matches. I don't mean that as in he's a really good jobber. I'm not saying that at all. He's obviously on the rise in AEW, even if he doesn't win all that often. But when he does lose, you often come away from the match thinking, yeah, he looked better there though. He looked really awesome. I'm not sure if that was the case this week, because both he and his TNT Championship Tournament opponent both looked really good. But once again, it was a result that doesn't really hurt Sammy at all. Even though he's been losing to the same opponent twice in quite big, important matches, I still think that he's always just got the ability, kind of like people we've talked about, like Rey Mysterio, to just bounce back from it. He's also been really good in the little promos and skits that the Inner Circle have been doing, but in a more hard wrestling sense, he took part in maybe the most terrifying spot of the week. All right, the second most terrifying spot of the week, because if you saw Ken Shamrock's disgusting stage dive at Impact this week, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Do search that online. But why am I ripping into Ken Shamrock? He could literally tear my head off. But Sammy Guevara took part in probably the most terrifying spot of the week, jumping his opponent before the bell, laying him across a ladder bridge, climbing up to the top rope, and then just doing a splash from the top rope to the ladder bridge on the apron, and that ladder did not budge one bit. I am the ladder. Now, it is a shame to see Sammy out of the TNT Championship Tournament. He would have been a wonderful first TNT champion, but at the same time, it can't be that long before he gets his hands on some kind of gold, either in a tag team alongside Jericho. I really want to see that, but AEW have an insane tag team division anyway. But I could definitely see him as a TNT champion of the future, and then in years and years' time, potentially even as an AEW World Champion, but that all remains to be seen. Anyway, another really good week for Sammy. Now let's move on to number 3. Okay, we're going to talk about the Young Bucks and their match. So number 3 this week is Nick Jackson. I'm just gonna, you know who number 2 is going to be then, because he won the match, but both of them were just awesome in this. Now, if you didn't see what I'm referring to, basically the two Young Bucks had a match against each other on Being the Elite, on episode 200 of Being the Elite. This was another of those big conceptual, like, environmental matches that we've seen quite a lot of recently. It's another in the whole lineage of this recent weird time of, like, the Boneyard match, arguably the Firefly Funhouse match, the Empty Arena match between Gargano and Ciampa, probably Moxley and Hager counts as well. There's been quite a few right now that are very noteworthy of varying quality. And this Buck versus Buck match was kind of a match around their own compound, around their own backyard and all the surroundings and everything. It's kind of like what you dream of as a kid, what you do with your mates when you're just pretending to have a little scrap outside. It was very childish, but very, very effective as well. But one, because it was done by two amazing athletes, but two, because it was done with an incredible sense of humor. So focusing on Nick for just a second, he was the heel of this match, and basically he'd been a real meanie to Matt Jackson, which was a strange angle to go with because Nick has been injured recently, and the story on Being the Elite's been about his return to ring fitness. However, you know, Nick's just more of a natural heel, so I can kind of understand that. At the same time, while I'm trying to analyse this match, I feel really stupid for doing so, because this obviously wasn't meant to be taken seriously. However, because of that, in a weird sort of Young Bucks way, it was kind of cool. They didn't go fully ridiculous with it. It wasn't totally overboard in terms of the silliness. There was wrestling in here as well, some very impressive wrestling at points, but then you had spots in a golf cart, spots in a pool and that sort of thing. But yeah, great performance here from both guys. Great performance from Nick, 8 points for him. Now let's talk about number 2. It's obviously Matt Jackson. Matt was great here too. He won the match. They did a whole flashback sequence, kind of Firefly Funhouse ripoff, where they both went back in time to the Rockers and the barbershop window and that whole thing, with Nick turning on Matt. They also did a reference to Shawn and Ric Flair at WrestleMania 24, the I'm Sorry I Love You, but with Matt putting on the kind of spiky boot that he wore in PWG when he wanted to destroy someone. Super kicked his brother with the spiky boot, or was it a kick pad, but some kind of prop, and then he won the match. But the way that I'm telling you it right now does not do it justice at all. It was really funny, really tongue-in-cheek, but also pretty good as well. There were some impressive moments, as I say. You know those suplexes that Matt does, where he'll do a back suplex, then bridge over, and then do another one, and then it goes on and on like that? He did that like on a hard, I think it was on a tennis court or something, or maybe it was on even a little bit of a slope, I'm not certain, but he did it for a while, and it was really impressive. But of course, there is one thing that everyone's talking about in relation to the Young Bucks, and I can't overlook this. That's the fact that the Revival have obviously been released from WWE, and that means that potentially in the future we could see that long talked about match between probably the two best tag teams in the world, although there are a lot of very close contenders. But over the span of the past few years, the Revival and the Bucks have kind of been a cut above everyone else. And the fact that we could see that is really exciting. AEW have already given us the best tag team match ever, maybe? One of the best tag team matches, certainly in the past few years, between Hangman Adam Page and Kenny Omega and the Bucks. And they could do so again with the Bucks versus the Revival. I think that could be awesome. A lot of people will say, well, the Bucks are just spot monkeys, blah, blah, blah. That is a trash argument. They are incredible storytellers. Just look at their tag matches in New Japan and just look at that one against Hangman and Omega. They know what they're doing. And when they really put their minds to it, they can have tag team matches better than almost anyone on the planet. And finally, number 1 this week, and my wrestler of the week, progressing through to the semi-finals of the TNT Championship tournament, where he will meet either, oh no wait, he's got to win first, I'm getting ahead of myself, where he has to beat Cody in the semi-finals, and if he does so, will then meet Lance Archer or Dustin Rhodes. It's almost certainly going to be Lance Archer. It's Darby Allen. What an intro that was, bloody hell. Darby Allen is of course my boy. I've been a huge fan of his since this very series began. I know a lot of people will have been fans of him even longer, especially if they're more familiar with his work on the Indies or Evolve. But yeah, another great match on TV from Darby Allen, who just brings it each and every time he steps into the ring. The match I'm talking about was the one against Sammy Guevara, where Darby had to withstand that onslaught at the start of the match before the bell had even really rang. Sammy going up the ladder or up the ring post and jumping onto the ladder, and Darby just taking that and the ladder not giving at all. It was a horrible start, and then Darby had to fight his way back as the underdog babyface, a role he really thrives in, of course. The match turned into an awesome one, with Darby just working the foot of Sammy a lot. The boot came off and Sammy was doing one-legged springboards and stuff. And eventually Darby was able to pick up the win, reversing Sammy's finisher, catching his knee and rolling him into the Last Supper, which I think he uses just infrequently enough that it's still a bit of a surprise when he busts it out. And it's kind of his super finisher. No one gets out of the Last Supper. And it doesn't feel cheap like roll-ups often do. It feels calculated. You know, he's rolled their legs over. It's a proper pinning combination. So because of that, Darby Allin is my wrestler of the week. Congratulations to him. Now I checked the stats, and bizarrely, I think this might have been the first time he's ever been wrestler of the week. That can't be true, but I think that's what it said on my spreadsheet. He must always bust out his best matches in weeks when other great matches are going on. Anyway, yes, congratulations to Darby Allin. I don't think he's going to win that semi-final match. It makes sense for Cody to move on to the final. and get destroyed by Lance Archer, or heroically beat Lance Archer, who will presumably have just killed Dustin Rhodes in his semi-final. But imagine if Darby beats Cody, because he's taken him to a time limit draw before, and then he's lost to him, I believe. And now imagine if Darby beats him. That would be an incredible story, and I kind of hope they do that instead, with Darby going on to the final, and then Cody not getting the title shot that he really, really wanted, and that it seemed was very likely that he would get with Lance Archer in the other half of this bracket. So that's very interesting. I wonder which way they'll go with that. Part of me wants to see Darby beat Cody, but let me know what you think in the comments section down below. Now, without any further ado, let's take a look at the league table. Not a lot of change in the top 20 this time because there were a lot of new entries for 2020 this time around this week, but we see Darby Allen there has moved up into joint 6th place, level with the current Cruiserweight champion, Jordan Devlin. As we progress further down, we see Cody there, who will be facing Darby in that semi-final very, very soon. There's Matt Jackson and there is Nick Jackson. They have jumped up into the top 20 as well after their wonderful match on Being the Elite. Check it out, and if you get angry at it, that's probably kind of the point. So that's it. Thank you very much for watching Wrestlers of the Week this week. I've been Jack from Cultaholic.com. I hope everyone's doing all right out there, keeping themselves productive, keeping their minds healthy and everything. Try your best not to get too down, even though, I mean, this week's been pretty hard. I've been getting pretty miserable on Sundays because it's just been so boring. But we can all push through it together and it'll be over before you know it. Stay safe out there, look after yourselves, and I'll see you very soon.